So I'm here to read you chapter 10 of Tom's Midnight Garden. Chapter 10, Games and Tales. Tom was half inclined to believe her, at first. Her gaze was very bright and steady, and with her red cheeks and long black hair and stiff little dignity, there was perhaps something regal about her, something of a picture book queen. Immediately behind her was the dark green background of a yew tree. In one hand she held up a twig of yew she had broken off in her nervousness, or to play with. In the other hand she held her half-eaten apple. She held the two things like a queen's sceptre and orb. "You can kiss my hand," she said. "I don't want to," said Tom. He added, "Thank you," as an afterthought, in case she really were a princess. But he had his suspicions. "If you're a princess, your father and mother must be a king and queen. Where's their kingdom? Where are they?" "I'm not allowed to say." "Why not?" She hesitated and then said, "I am held here a prisoner. I am a princess in disguise. There is someone here who calls herself my aunt, but she isn't so. She is wicked and cruel to me. And those aren't my cousins either, although I have to call them so. Now you know my whole secret. I will permit you to call me princess." She stretched out her hand towards him again, but Tom ignored it. "And now," she said, "I will allow myself to play with you." "I don't mind playing," said Tom, "but I'm not used to playing silly girl games." "Come with me," said the girl. She showed him the garden. Tom had thought that he knew it well already, but now, with Hattie, he saw places and things he had not guessed at before. She showed him all her hiding places, a leafy crevice between a wall and a tree trunk, where a small human body could just wedge itself, a hollowed out centre to a box bush, and a run leading to it, like the run made in the hedge by the meadow, a wigwam shelter made by a rearrangement of the bean sticks that Abel had left leaning against the side of the heating house, a series of hiding holes behind the fronds of the great ferns that grew alongside of the greenhouse, a feathery green tunnel between the asparagus ridges. She showed Tom how to hide from a search simply by standing behind the trunk of the big fir tree. You had to listen intently and move exactly and noiselessly, of course, so that the trunk was always between yourself and the searcher. Hattie showed Tom many things he could not have seen for himself. When she was lifting the sacking over the rhubarb tubs to show him the sticks of rhubarb, Tom remembered something. "Did you once leave a written message here?" "Did you once find one?" asked Hattie. "Yes, a letter to fairies." Tom did not hide the disgust he had felt. Fairies! Whoever could have put that there? Hattie wondered. "To fairies! Just fancy!" She pulled a grimace, but awkwardly, and she changed the subject quickly. "Come on, Tom, I'll show you more." She opened doors for him. She unlatched the door into the gooseberry wire, and they went in. Among the currant bushes at the end they found a blackbird that must have squeezed in by a less official entrance, attracted by the fruit. The bird beat its wings frantically against the wire at their approach, but they manoeuvred round it and then drove it before them down the gooseberry wire and out, in a glad rush, through the door they had left open. "It's lucky we found it," said Hattie. "I'm afraid that Abel—" She shook her head. "I really think he'd rather see birds starving than eating his fruit." For Tom she opened the orchard door from the sundial path, and then the door into the potting shed. Among the tools and seed boxes and flower pots and rolls of chicken wire, they found a sack full of feathers, hen feathers and goose feathers. Hattie dug her fingers in and threw them up into the air in a brown and white storm so thick that even Tom thought it felt like a tickling on his nose, and sneezed. Then Hattie crept over the floor laughing and picked up all the fallen feathers and put them back, because otherwise Abel would be angry. Tom sat on the side of the wheelbarrow and swung his legs and pointed out any stray feathers still drifting down. He could not have helped Hattie, he knew that. With both hands and all his force, he could not have lifted even a feather's weight. Meanwhile, Hattie, on her hands and knees, seemed to have forgotten that she was a princess. After that, they went to the little brick-built heating house at the end of the greenhouse, and Hattie set about opening the door for Tom. She was far too small to be able to reach the flat square of iron that latched the top of the door, but standing on tiptoe and straining upward with her yew twig, she was finally able to poke it aside. She opened the door, and they went down steps inside into the darkness and the smell of rust and cold cinders. The weather was so warm that the stove for the greenhouse was not working. There was a small shelf with 2 or 3 books on it that Hattie said belonged to Abel. The shelf was just out of reach, but they could see that the topmost book of the pile was a Bible. Abel says the Bible must be above all the other books, like the Queen ruling all over England. They went into the greenhouse, among the cacti and the creepers that swayed down from the roof suspended cage pots, and plants with strange flowers that could never be expected to live, like other plants, out of doors. Tom gasped for breath in the greenhouse and wondered how they endured this stifling air. There was a castor oil plant. Tom felt a little sick when Hattie named it. There was a sensitive plant too, and Hattie showed Tom how, when she touched a leaf tip, the whole frond drooped and shrank from her by folding itself together. The plant's sensitivity was something quite out of the ordinary. It seemed to feel even Tom's touch. He was so delighted that he worked his fingers over the whole plant and left it in one droop of nervous dejection. Then they leant over the water tank and tried to see the goldfish, and tried to catch them. Hattie barred her arm to plunge it in, and Tom laid his arm along hers and behind it, with his open hand behind hers, finger to finger. So, as with one arm and one hand, they dipped into the water and hunted. Tom could have done nothing by himself, but when Hattie very nearly caught a fish, Tom's hand seemed one with hers in the catching. Then Hattie led Tom back to the doorway of the greenhouse and showed him the coloured panes and bordered the glass panelling of the upper half. Through each colour of pane you could see a different garden outside. Through the green pane, Tom saw a garden with green flowers under a green sky. Even the geraniums were green-black. Through the red pane lay a garden as he might have seen it through the redness of shut eyelids. The purple glass filled the garden with thunderous shadow and with overcoming night. The yellow glass seemed to drench it in lemonade. At each of the 4 corners of this bordering was a colourless square of glass, engraved with a star. "And if you look through this one," said Hattie. They screwed up their eyes and looked through the engraved glass. "You can't really see anything through the star," said Tom, disappointed. "Sometimes I like that the best of all," said Hattie. "You look and see nothing, and you might think there wasn't a garden at all. But all the time, of course there is, waiting for you." They went out into the garden again, and Hattie began to tell Tom about the yew trees round the lawn. The one he had climbed and waved from was called the Matterhorn. Another tree was called the Lookout, and another the Steps of St. Paul's. One tree was called Trixie because of the difficulty of climbing it. Its main trunk was quite bare for some way up from the ground and could only be swarmed. Hubbard and James and Edgar had all swarmed it in their time. Hattie could not swarm. Tom felt superior, princess or no princess. Sometimes Hattie's information seemed doubtful to Tom. They paused by a bushy plant to which Hattie drew attention. "This is the burning bush," she said. She plucked a leaf, rubbed it between her fingers, and then held them up to Tom's nose. He sniffed the fingertips. The smell was of the faintest to him. "Should it be a smell of scorching?" he asked doubtfully. "No, James said the smell is of lemon." "Why is it called the burning bush then?" "They say that if you come out at midnight on Midsummer Eve and set a flame to this, the whole plant will blaze up." "How do you know? Have you ever tried?" "No, of course not, because there's only one plant in the garden and we don't want that burnt to ashes." Oh, Tom supposed to himself that it might be true. Hattie drew nearer to him. "Shall I tell you something? Something secret?" "If you like." This bush is grown from a slip of the real burning bush, the one that burnt when Moses was there. But that was long, long ago, in the Bible. I shan't tell you secrets again, said Hattie offendedly. But she could never resist telling him. Not only on that first day of meeting, but on all the days following, her secrets and stories poured from her with haste and eagerness, as though she were afraid that Tom's company would not be hers for long. When they were tired with playing in the garden, Hattie would lead the way to the summer house. They went up the steps and Hattie opened the door for them. From the back of the summer house, she brought forward 2 twisted iron garden chairs and put them in the doorway, for herself and Tom. There they used to sit, looking over the oblong pond, watching the fish rise, and Hattie talked. Once Edgar found them, they were not aware that he had been standing, staring and listening, until suddenly, from one side of their view down the garden, he called to Hattie, "What are you up to there, Hattie?" "I'm not up to anything, Cousin Edgar." "For the last 5 minutes you've been talking and nodding and smiling and listening all by yourself." "I am not by myself, I am talking to a friend of mine." "Where is he?" "On this other chair, of course." Edgar burst out laughing very unpleasantly. "Really, Cousin Hattie, people would think you're queer in this head. Once it used to be fairies, which was just silliness, and now it's somebody who isn't there." He went off laughing. Hattie was trembling when she turned back to Tom. "And now he'll go and tell the others, and they'll jeer at me, and Aunt Grace will say it shows how unfit I am to go anywhere with other children outside in the village." "Well then," said Tom, "why did you tell Edgar about me?" She opened her eyes very wide at him. "But one must tell the truth, mustn't one?" Often, from their seat, they could see Abel at work down the garden. He would sometimes stop and look in the direction of the summer house, and Hattie would then wave to him in a princess-like manner. "So sad about Abel," said Hattie mysteriously. "Sad? The whole family is a sad one. But you must promise not to tell if I tell you." Tom said nothing, and Hattie went straight on. "He had just one brother, and they were together in the fields one day. It was just before Abel became a gardener here. His brother was very jealous of him, and one day, in the fields, they fought. Well, really, his brother just attacked Abel, with a weapon, murderously." "Go on." "He killed Abel, that is, of course. He very nearly killed him. There was a great deal of blood. It lay smoking on the ground of the field." There was a horrified silence, and then Tom said suddenly, "What was Abel's brother's name?" "Really, I don't remember," said Hattie, looking away from Tom at a bird in the sky. "Was his brother's name Cain?" asked Tom. Hattie pretended not to have heard him. This was particularly irritating to Tom, as it was what he had to suffer from all the other people in the garden. "Because the story of Cain and Abel is in the Bible, and Cain really killed Abel. I don't believe this Abel who gardens here has anything to do with the Bible. Abel, except he was called after him. I don't believe this Abel ever had a brother who tried to murder him. Suppose I told you that Susan had told me, and Susan is Abel's sweetheart. Or suppose I told you that Abel himself told me, as a secret." "I'm not sure you don't tell fibs," said Tom, and even then he knew he was choosing a mild word to be kind to Hattie. "I dare you to go to Abel now and ask him whether he has a brother who tried to murder him." "I shan't ever, ever tell you any more secrets, ever!" Hattie cried passionately, but Tom knew how much to fear that. Meanwhile, she did not take up his challenge to have the matter out with Abel, and Tom took this as permission to disbelieve her story. It was only a step from that to disbelieving that Hattie herself was the princess she claimed to be. Yet it was true that she had made this garden a kind of kingdom. Thanks, Year 5. See you soon.